I'm going to stick my neck out and say Kamala will win.
Mm.
This may be getting ahead of your final question, but I don't care. Um, the but it doesn't matter. The country
Mm.
will remain divided. The real story isn't Trump anymore. Trump is
Mm.
Trump. You know, he may be a liar, but there's one thing that he never lies about, which is who he is.
Mm.
He's clear what his intentions are. He may lie about how he'll get there. He may soft pedal it. So the question has been really since January 6th, 2021 is why do people still support him or
Mm.
think that he is somehow the answer?
Hello and welcome to Eric McElroy's American Exchange with me, Eric McElroy. Thank you very much for tuning in, and we're very excited this week to have Michael Goldfarb back on the podcast. He's a journalist with the BBC and many years ago with NPR. He's got his own Substack and podcast called FRDH, First Rough Draft of History, which are both invaluable to understand state of the world, what's happening, and especially, of course, with US politics, which is our interest today. This podcast is a little bit different in that both Michael and I are currently, as you're first hearing this, in the United States. He's reporting live on the ground from Georgia and North Carolina. I am at a wedding in the Philadelphia area, which is also a swing state. So, sort of reporting live on the ground, but I will be picking up things while I'm there. So, we pre recorded this, and it was more a conversation about Michael's extensive background in reporting on presidential elections going back many years. He's seen a lot of elections up close and personal. He was there when Trump was inaugurated. He was there reporting live on the ground in 2020 and 2016, 2012. So he's been there and seen it. So we take a bit of a longer look at the state of play of the election. Of course, making some assumptions that certain things haven't exploded, literally or metaphorically, in the race, how Kamala's done so far, what he expects to happen in the next week, what he's going to be looking for on the ground up close in Georgia. And it's just a fascinating conversation because he has such a breadth of knowledge on elections and the view of politics that we both share from looking at it from overseas, but caring deeply about what happens to our home country. So, another great conversation with Michael. Please enjoy. Oh, and for those of you who are watching on YouTube, remember to like, subscribe, and make a comment and share it with your friends and all those fantastic things. Here is Michael Goldfarb. I'm very pleased to welcome back to the podcast Michael Goldfarb. I'm excited about this. This is a different podcast than I've ever done in that we are taping this in advance. This is coming out the week before the election. And at the moment, we are both ourselves in the United States. So this is about a week or so out from when this is you're actually hearing this. At the moment, Michael and I are deeply embedded. He's embedded doing proper journalism. I'm embedded in a wedding, which a family member scheduled in a swing state less than a week before the election. So different places that we're at the moment. So Michael, welcome back to the podcast, first of all. And what do you hope to be doing at the moment that listeners are hearing this?
Well, I'll be somewhere within a 300-mile radius of Atlanta, trying to avoid Atlanta because it's an incredibly expensive city in the middle of an extremely inexpensive part of the country. But because it's an expense account city, what is Atlanta except freeways and conventions? And if you're going to Atlanta for a convention, means that you're on an expense account. And if you're
Mm.
on an expense account, that means the restaurants can charge you 20, 30, 40% more for a meal that 30 miles away is reasonable. So, anyways, I want to be somewhere in the South, Georgia, North Carolina, a point difference either way in terms of whether these states will go for Kamala Harris or for Donald Trump. Both have gone Democrat once in the last
Mm.
20 years. And so that's important. And also, let's face it, when it comes to wanting to be somewhere where there are likely shenanigans in the
Mm.
counting of the vote, well, Pennsylvania, I was there in 2020. There were plenty of shenanigans.
Yeah.
But my guess is that Georgia is going to lead the nation in challenges
Mm.
and, potential unpleasantness. We'll hope not. I'm not packing. I've been advised to maybe buy a gun
Oh
I'm
my
not sure.
God.
I'm not sure as a non-resident I can just walk into your corner gun store in rural Georgia and say,
Ah.
I'll take the Glock over there, you know.
I I have faith in America, Michael, that you will be able to find a gun shop in either Georgia or North Carolina where you can buy a gun. If I believe nothing else about our home country, I believe that.
Well, it's very funny here. Um, 20 years ago, when John Kerry was facing off against George W. Bush, I did an hour-long program about the South as the crucible of so much
Mm,
political change in America. I have to adjust that theory, of course, because Donald Trump is not from the South. He's not even
yeah.
from the South Bronx. I mean, he's from Queens and Manhattan. But leaving that aside, I got friendly with a couple of people while I was down there, and I've stayed in touch through the miracle of social media and email. And I'm going to, visit a friend
Mm.
who's now an emeritus professor at the University of Georgia and proud liberal. And he assured me in our email exchange about when we'd get together not to worry about my physical safety because he's got the largest collection of guns of any liberal in Georgia. He's also a big NASCAR fan and has some muscle cars in because if you're an emeritus professor you can afford to have
Yeah.
muscle cars in your garage. So I'm going to be amongst the liberal good old boys. They do exist.
Mm. I have a joke in my set to explain to British audiences that they think it's just right-wing nut jobs that have guns in America, but left-wing people have guns as well. It's just that our guns are organic. And that's the key difference there. So, I mean, you are like me. You watch a lot of this from afar. So I guess, going into the States and into this journey, how are you feeling about the state of the race compared to previous races? Knowing that we're both watching this from a distance, trying to get a sense of and a feel of what's happened so far.
Well, my basic feeling hasn't changed since 2016,
Mm,
where Donald Trump was beaten by Hillary Clinton, who was not a particularly good candidate. I mean, this has nothing to do with her being a woman or not. It's just, as she acknowledged, she was terrible at retail politics. And let's face it, the American electorate likes its strokes. I mean, they're like puppy dogs, you have to say. I say this to you, this subgroup of a subgroup in the great American weave, so you'll like me. And
mm,
she was bad at it. She didn't like campaigning. It was exhausting. She still beat him by a couple of million votes. And I was in Washington for the inauguration in January 2017, and I went and I filed a piece for the Observer newspaper here in London. And then the next day, I went out on the Million Woman March. And I was highly skeptical because I'm just highly skeptical of marching. I started marching when I was 17 or 18, before you were born, Eric, before you were
just
born.
by a whisker, by a whisker.
Yeah, but if you weren't there in 1968, man, you don't know. I know
That's
we're
true.
supposed to have forgotten everything that happened. I didn't drop that much acid. I know I remember. And I think a lot of political marching is just about feeling good about yourself. It doesn't really change much.
Yeah.
But the Million Women March, and I arrived as a skeptic, and I departed in a journalistic way. I departed thinking there is something here. And then 2 years later, I was in Georgia, in Atlanta, and to do something about the midterms for the BBC. And I ended up going out to a suburb, and some Democrats were going out to door knock, right? And I go to this strip mall, and they've rented an office, and all women getting ready to
Mm,
go out and door knock. So I start chatting with them, and they were not political activists. It was a
mm,
pretty rich suburb. And, there were lawyers, they were, high-powered real estate agents, selling multi-million dollar properties. And I said, do you do this? Have you done this before? No, we haven't done. One woman in particular, I remember, said, no, but I went to the Million Women March.
mm,
And I realized I had to do stuff, the stuff that I had taken for granted about abortion rights primarily. I just couldn't bear this man and so on and so forth. And they went out. And the group I was with did not turn. Unfortunately, that red district blue, although they came close. And I think in 2020 it did go blue.
Mm.
But in the next constituency over, which was Newt Gingrich's old constituency, they turned it
Yeah.
Democrat, you know?
Yeah.
And
That's right.
in 2020, Biden beat Trump by 8 million votes, right?
Mm.
That's a lot. And because of the anomaly of the Electoral College, it was close. But women played a critical part.
Mm.
And then in 2022 came Dobbs and the overturning of Roe. And ever since then, women at the local level, with men, of course, obviously, but
Yeah.
fighting for their bodily autonomy.
Mm.
Nobody measures this in the polling. I don't know why. It's ridiculous. I write about it at my Substack because it seems to me that this is what's really driving things.
Mm.
And at this point, a few weeks out, and I don't see many, and what's going to shift? Maybe
Yeah.
nuclear war breaking out over the Middle East, and that's not going to happen, or over Ukraine. So not much is going to shift. And I still think that women coming out in enormous numbers,
Mm.
women of all ages coming out in enormous numbers, will be the ultimate deciding factor.
I feel like because a lot of people have talked about the undercounting in prior elections, even though you're right that I mean that the popular vote went against Trump, but that there was undercounting of his support in various places, and it seems like that I'm hearing the whispers I'm hearing from the people that I watch and talk to that they think the undercount now is going to be in those women, and it's going to be possibly in the women who are in a more traditional conservative relationship, and but they're going to because when you go into that ballot box, you do vote alone. And that's going to be a shift, possibly.
I think that that's probably very true. And there are hints of it happening. It's more open now, you know.
Mm,
I mean, the Harris campaign has been very effective in dragging out. Yet it's like a daily discovery of some Republicans, ordinary suburban Republicans. I voted for Trump twice, but I've had it, and
yeah,
are they real? Are they not real? It's a way of reaching through social media
yeah,
to you know the undecided eyeball. I'm not sure there really are any undecideds. I'll be honest with you. There are people I think who are too ashamed
mm,
to say they're going to vote for Trump, so they say they're undecided. But I don't think that there's that many undecideds. I think people have made up their minds. They don't want to talk to pollsters. They don't want to share. They don't want to
yeah,
tell their husbands, as you just said. I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going
mm,
to tell you because we live in Texas, and we go to a big Baptist mega church where everybody's voting for Trump. But
hmm.
me, I've got my private thoughts.
Do you think that because have you ever seen a presidential campaign for either side try and bring in so many people from the opposing party, like Harris is doing with Liz Cheney to Adam Kinzinger, can't talk yet, this morning, to, there's tons and tons of Republicans who are big, bold voices standing up against the party. I mean, the vice president, even though Pence hasn't endorsed Kamala, he's not supporting his president. Bush has stayed silent. Romney's doing whatever I don't know what the hell you say Romney's doing right now because he won't say he's going to vote for Harris. Have you ever seen this before?
No, no, not
Yeah.
not as one of the political themes of my entire life has been the increasing polarization, and the tribal
Mm,
nature. It's like, how did we win World War II? I mean, people put that tribal stuff aside because there was a huge external enemy, and everybody got regimented into the military or into helping the military effort. And that kind of carried on for a couple of decades, and then when civil rights got underway in the mid 60s and legislation was pushed forward, that that seemed to return, you know, the kind of partisanship and tribal nature it's one of the reasons why I think the South is the crucible of
Mm,
American politics. I mean, it was the South, white Southerners, that really rebelled against civil rights legislation that today everybody takes for granted.
yeah.
Um, I just, I, that polarization, which started in the mid 60s, has deepened and deepened, and it was accelerated when Ronald Reagan ran a very ideological, an unusually ideological
Mm,
campaign. I mean, he was close to Barry Goldwater and William F. Buckley, and he was an ideologue. And they revamped the American economy, and the results economically you can argue about, but politically, you define yourself on what kind of economy you want. You say, well, I want a free market economy with no rules and whatever, except rules to protect me, because I've got to be protected. You know, I saw something funny today that people who are normal Republicans suddenly realize that the difference between a rules-based order and a
mm,
Trump government is the difference between the law and the mafia. You
yeah.
know, if you don't have the law to protect you, then you have to turn to the mafia. That's why the mafia grew. The law wouldn't protect people, but the mafia would, but you had to pay them.
Mm,
You know, a
yes.
small tithe, you know.
Mm.
So when you ask, the idea that Liz and Dick Cheney, and by the way, they don't get out of my personal, um, they don't get a remission in hell or in purgatory because they've done this. No, they are there forever. All right. I'm playing God here. But by the same token, it is incredibly, incredibly um, small h historic that they would come out this way. And, as you explained to the audience, we were talking a little bit before this aired. If in the closing, Mitt Romney and George Bush pulled their fingers out and said,
Mm.
you know what, this is not possible, and I endorse Kamala Harris, it would not surprise me, particularly Mitt Romney. George Bush, I don't know, he's been odd since he left office,
Yeah.
Mr. Paint. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like, I guess, yeah. Hmm.
Do you have do you have his nudes of him in the bath on your wall in your home?
No, 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 no. And I'm in a very modern London accommodation. There is no bath. It's so funny. The English discovered showers
Yeah.
about a year after I first came here. Everybody got in the bath, and they had a shower hose.
I had
This
one of those. Yeah, I remember
I
that.
mean, I don't think people, certainly people who check into this from America, can't imagine what it was like, what plumbing was like in this country until
It's
about
not much better.
1995.
Yeah.
Come on, man. How,
Yeah, we had that shower. This is where it's a bathtub and you just have a hose and you sit in
yeah,
the bathtub and you just shower it. They don't attach the hose to the wall because there's no water pressure.
right. Well, I mean, I used to go to like the Five and Dime to Woolworths. That was a
Yeah.
store, younger listeners, that existed and then went bankrupt because it couldn't keep up with Walmart. Well, at Woolies they had these rubber things because they didn't have mixing taps. It's another thing they didn't have in this country,
Yeah.
and they didn't understand mixing taps, right? And then suddenly the French made these really sexy mixing taps. And from about the mid 90s onward, every middle class person in England redid their bathroom with French mixing taps because they like nice shapes and stuff. And I used to go to Woolworths because they wore out, and you would stick one rubber plug on the hot, one
Yep.
rubber plug on the cold, and then made like a wishbone, and then that's what you held up and you washed your hair with.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know, man. We're off topic a little bit,
We're
but
off topic a little bit, but
people
it's nice to
understand.
talk about something else. Um, but I mean, if this doesn't, I mean, so this is unprecedented support from the opposition party, deep opposition, the furthest to the left, furthest to the right coming together. I mean, if that doesn't shift the needle, how if people are so entrenched in their views, how do you have a democracy? I mean, I'm not saying that if it was the other way around, the same thing was happening. I would like to think If I was normally a supporter of liberal politics, but then the furthest liberal comes out and says, "No, your candidate is a risk to democracy," I would like to think I would be moved by that. And if that doesn't, I don't, what else, what messaging do you need to reach people?
I don't I, I don't know that there is any. That's why I said it's not likely that many people are going to be convinced in the
Yeah.
final furlong of this race. I mean, in a perfect world, we would have all just taken a sleeping pill on October 15th and awakened on November 5th and gone to the polls,
Yeah.
because there's nothing that's going to really happen that will change this. I mean, I think that this goes to the deeper point about this election, which is I'm going to stick my neck out and say Kamala will win.
Mm.
This may be getting ahead of your final question, but I don't care. Um, the but it doesn't matter. The country
Mm.
will remain divided.
Yeah.
I've been writing, I've been and screaming at people with full-time jobs in journalism via Twitter that, the real story isn't Trump anymore. Trump is
Mm.
Trump. You know, he may be a liar, but there's one thing that he never lies about, which is who he is.
Mm.
He's clear what his intentions are. He may lie about how he'll get there. He may soft pedal it. So the question has been really since January 6th, 2021 is why do people still support him or
Mm.
think that he is somehow the answer?
Yeah.
And those people are impervious to persuasion. I I in October 2016, I made a series of documentaries for BBC Radio, and the last one, just before the election day, I called The Unswayables. And I did what everybody journalists did. I went to Johnstown, Pennsylvania. All right, so
Mm.
Johnstown is this post-industrial place where the Bethlehem Steel Factory stands like a Bruce Springsteen image, rusting. It's still in use, by the way, but with a minimal amount of production. And there's this downtown of, a typical early 20th century factory town, empty, drug addicts, addiction everywhere. A terrible, just terrible landscape. And I went there and I stumbled into a couple of people, one of whom was a guy my age who had grown up in the town, went to Vietnam. When he came back from Vietnam, he'd gone, it's just like a bloody Bruce Springsteen song. He went to work in the factory. That
Yeah.
was it. And then it shut down.
Yeah.
And he was standing with his daughter and his son-in-law, and they were in their 30s, late 30s actually. And I heard them from across the street because there's no traffic. There's no traffic in this city, right? And I was out there recording some piece to microphone about, that I thought I might end the documentary with. And I was looking for a sound effect, and there were no sound effects. It was just dead. And then I hear them talking. So I wander over and I say, "Hey, whatever. Can I heard you were saying, and I hope you don't think I'm rude, but I could hear it. There was nobody else, no other noise." And they got it.
Mm.
And we had a chat, and it was an interesting chat because this guy my age said, "I can't vote for Trump. He's
Mm.
a monster." He actually said he's a monster.
Wow.
And his kids, and they shouldn't, kids to me, I mean, they were in their late 30s, were all in for Trump.
Mm.
And he engaged with them and I engaged with them, and yeah, they were Christians. And what had happened is he had moved south because he had to move south to look for work. He'd found non-unionized work in construction or whatever he did.
Mm.
And his son-in-law, as is they all met, and his son-in-law had a small business making kitchen cabinets. That's what they did in Virginia, uh, between Charlottesville and Richmond. And I stayed in touch with them.
Mm.
Anyway, I called that documentary "The Unswayables." You'll never persuade them. And I went back to do something about the first 100 days of the Trump administration, and met up with them in a rural place and had a heart attack kind of fried
Mm.
Southern lunch.
Yeah.
And I heard them out. And I just said, why would you bother? I mean, if you were a
Mm.
Democratic, you cannot hope to reach these people. And there are a lot of folks like that. So, you know, um,
They're just,
I think that this polarization is not solvable by one election.
I think, well, then that brings us to the people that are behind Trump and supporting him and the JD Vances now, because it's a more sophisticated operation if he gets in this time. And I think I have felt for a long time, but of course, immediately people say it's hyperbole, that there's fascist tendencies going on here. State control, Ron DeSantis attacking Disney, for example, because they say things that he doesn't like. That's a fascist type of thing. I think that this quiet rise of fascism, and I know you're more of a student of history than I am because I'm a clown. I think that this rise and acceptance of a fascist way of governing is in correlation with the fading of the greatest generation. And as they've gone away, and the people who fought fascism have gone away, that this has led to a rise of people who are like, oh yeah, fascism isn't a bad choice. I mean, do you see that?
I think it's possible. I mean, I guess I perceived that it was always there.
Mm.
And it, let's say I use the F word a lot. All the F words. Give me
They're
an
all
F word.
beautiful words, and you can say
You
them
know,
on this podcast if you want
no, no, no. Fasterisks.
to.
The authoritarian thing
Mm.
preceded it, and it's distinctly American. And again, it goes back to the 60s where, you know, there was this fracturing. You mentioned the greatest generation. You know, your country calls. There's a war in
Mm.
Vietnam. You go. We
Yeah,
went to World War II. We went to Korea. You know, and people said no, no, actually, we're not. And the authoritarian thing there, you know, I've never been in the military, all right,
mm.
but I hang around the military for work a
Yeah.
lot, and I'm protected by them. I have been protected by the U.S. military in some hairy situations. There is in the ranks that there are people who just buy in. You get the buy-in
Mm.
for following orders. Following, this is how we win, this is what we do. And what happened was in the 60s, those people didn't quite get what was going on. You
Yeah.
follow or you do what you're supposed to. And if you don't, you're going to fuck up the unit. Because in war, you know, there were, I'm certain, in fact, I know because, you know, this is my father's generation. All
Mm.
the men I knew, you know, there were guys who were like Yossarian in Catch 22. You know, they just didn't buy into the whole military structure, but they knew that if they wanted to survive and live another day, they had to kind of at least live within it. But they were always cynical about it and wisecracking. And there were guys who said, you know, thought, well, you're risking my life with your attitude. I mean, that's
Mm.
just the way it was. That was played on by, you know, right-wing politicians.
Mhm.
And the inevitable destination for that kind of thinking over a period of decades is fascism, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that it's always there, probably in any situation, you know, to speak historically. There's a wonderful film called The Molly Maguires. Did you ever see it?
I don't, no, I don't
Oh,
think so.
it's a film about starting a miners' union in Western
Mm.
Pennsylvania. And the
Okay.
Molly Maguires were thugs hired by, you know, people like Andrew Carnegie and whatever to break up union organizers. And I think that they too are, it's always been there in the American, and not just American, I mean, any industrial economy has these. men who buy into the boss. The
Mm,
boss says this, he's paying me, and you're trying to fuck with the boss. Therefore, I will
yeah.
fuck with you. And because I'm big and strong and, tough and have a lead pipe in my hand, I'm really going to fuck you up. And that too breeds fascism. So, you know, I think that it just exists in society. People who follow the boss, follow the
Right.
rules, and people who question when that's not a good thing. And then the
But the
boss,
unma but what it feels like with Trump and with JD Vance and all these, they're pulling that was done with a kind of underneath that was kept down below quietly. But now it's just like, no, we're going to turn the military on the people who speak against me. We are going to go after journalists and comedians. I mean, when they came for the journalists, that was fine, but the comedians, God protect us, um, saying it out loud. The quiet part is out loud now. That's different, isn't it?
yeah, that is different. That's completely different. Um, yeah. Uh, in and where it's coming from. It would
Yeah,
be one thing. I mean, if you go back and look at some of the hair-raising kinds of speeches made by white Southern Democrats running
yeah,
for office in the 20s and 30s about and I can't say the N word, but that's
yeah.
the word they used, and keeping them in their place. I mean, because within that society, that region, it was okay to speak like that. And
Mhm.
now, what I think is really disturbing, you're right to point your finger at it, is across America, it is okay for the top of the Republican Party ticket to say things like that. To say, and to say that the 2020 election was fraudulent
Yeah.
when they know it's not. I mean, it would be one thing if they sincerely believed, and there was, oh, let's take an example, Bush v. Gore,
Mm.
500,000 votes in it, not
Yep.
8 million, 500,000. And it would be one thing to question how Florida was counted. Florida was
Hmm.
miscounted. I can tell you from reporting,
Yeah.
Al Gore won Florida, but
Yep.
he didn't want to fight for it for the good of the country. Um, Maybe he didn't want the job, which goes to show you should never put nepo babies at the top of a ticket. People need to people need to have earned it. I'm sorry, Al Gore should have played Hamlet on the stage, not in
Hmm.
front of the Supreme Court. Do I want the job? Do I not want the job? To be or not to be? Al Gore, go away. Anyway, see, I'm not a doctrinaire Democrat.
Yeah.
I know my team has put some fuck ups in front of the
Oh
public.
yeah.
No, but I mean, look, the fact that Trump and Vance are willing to say this stuff is really concerning because there is, people do follow the leader. That's the
Yeah.
point. And in following this kind of leadership, it can only deepen division.
Yeah, I mean, when you are a politician, I think sometimes people, oh, why aren't they really saying something? Like, and that's going to be old news now, but Kamala Harris's interview with Fox News, who knows what's going to happen between now and then that will be more outrageous. But she was pressed on, the cases against Trump, I think, and oh, it was about, the judicial, you know,
They call it
the
lawfare.
government, yeah, government using lawfare against Trump. And she's like, no, she wasn't going to comment on that because she's the vice president of the United States. She has a role in the federal government. For her to comment on an existing case would be inappropriate. And people
Yeah.
interpret that as weakness when it's actually leadership. I have a side question, a nice tangent, and then I want to come back to something else.
Oh, enough of these
Um,
questions. We just want to dance.
you mentioned Al Gore. I was thinking about this the other day. Everybody has been standing up for Kamala. Where the fuck is Al Gore? Where is he gone? Because I mean, Clinton was there, Biden was there, Obama's are there. Uh, Jimmy Carter, was like, my last breath will be voting for Kamala Harris. Where is Al Gore?
He's look, he's deeply involved in you know practical solutions for the environmental
But
catastrophe. But I genuinely think he just doesn't want to be in the public spotlight, except, you know, to use whatever he has left, whatever Q factor he has left, to call attention to a project he's working on.
yeah,
And frankly, I don't care. I mean, I wish the Clintons were. would kind of not be so present. So Big Bill was down in Georgia,
Yeah.
and he's slowing down. I mean, he's 80, and you can see that he's slowed down, and he was a barrel of energy.
Oh, yeah.
Um, so 80 is, I don't know. I got a few minutes yet. So before I kind of start staggering around. And he's still got a full head of hair, and so do I. Although
Yep.
mine is retreating, I have to say.
That's all that matters is as long as we can keep a little bit of hair. Not that there's anything wrong with other follically challenged peoples. You mentioned the military and protecting you, and that reminds me, we're both overseas voters. We're engaged Americans. I'm sure I've sent my ballot in. The attack and Democrats abroad this year, I think, have been really effective in engaging the vote from abroad because it's a powerful, it's a narrow elections. I don't have the numbers to hand, but Arizona was won by about 18,000 votes. There were 20,000 votes from abroad. Obviously, not all of those went to Biden, but that's an impact when the margins are this close. So Democrats abroad have really been effective this year in engaging with voters and engagement. The Republicans have noticed, and of course, rather than try and engage their own voters, they've just said it's fraudulent. Don't count the voters from abroad. But a big chunk of those aren't just Democrats abroad, they're military voters from abroad who, according to, common history allegedly, are Republican. Do you think that will have an impact on how those folks vote, having their votes attacked by the party they allegedly would support?
You know, I'm not even trying to do an educated vote on the modern military because you would think that with all the insults directed by
Yeah.
Trump at the military, really, I don't, you know, I think, but people bring their attitudes from
Mm,
home on deployment. I think that
yeah.
that's true. I think there'll be some, my guess is there will be people who think, well, the way Biden withdrew from Afghanistan, and
Yeah.
frankly, it doesn't wash for me. But they say, well, we were just following the Trump agreement, even though they were,
Yeah.
because what other Trump agreements have they not followed?
Yeah.
It was precipitous. It was always going to be a difficult thing, but it really left a bad taste around the world
Mm,
and or around that part of the world with a direct connection to Afghanistan. And I wonder how that will affect things. On the other
mm,
hand, the officer class, I'm pretty sure, will vote Democrat because this
mm.
is, you know, the degree, having Mark Milley come out, which has been very brave of him. But I think the officer class really knew just how bad things are. And even if some will question Biden's caution in arming Ukraine, on
Mm,
the other hand, I think that they understand that you have to have a commander in chief who's sane, who
mm.
isn't, and I do think he would, because we have the example of what happened during Black Lives Matter when he dragged Milley out. And Milley
Yeah.
had turned up in his fatigues, as he's written. He didn't anticipate, being used as a prop in a photo call. He was just wearing his fatigues because that's what he was at work at the Pentagon,
Yeah.
and as the top military guy, unlike the Secretary of Defense, who
Yep.
wears a suit and tie, he was wearing a uniform. I think they realize that Trump is dead serious about using the military on domestic opponents. I don't think there's any doubt about that. So that's how they go. But the other interesting thing, and this I know from experience, is Republicans abroad are not happy.
Mm.
It's easier for them to be above the Fox News created environment.
Yeah.
And they have their own issues about being double taxed. Some of them are
Hmm.
renouncing citizenship. I mean, there are
Yeah.
huge ads. I mean, you probably see them in your social media. What law
Yep.
firm to call in London if you're thinking about renouncing your American citizenship. And these are, uber patriotic Republicans, but their patriotism stops when they have to pay tax in the UK and in America.
Yeah.
I'm lucky. I don't make enough money.
I'm with you there, brother.
It's like listeners say, how do you get out of it? I said, because the seal, the, you have to make above a certain amount of money, right?
Yep.
And I in my best years, which is why I still work in my mid 70s, in my best years, I never came close. So I only paid tax here in Britain.
Yeah. No, I know. And
Oh, don't
yeah.
worry, you're not giving me free money, American listeners. Every check I ever got from NPR, they took out FICA. My Social Security is paid for. All right. The rest of it, they never paid me enough that I had to pay double tax.
I know. I'd love to have that burden. And then I could complain about it. Yeah, and just yeah, the Republic. Well, many of the Republicans abroad, their obsession is about the taxation thing, and it's like America is more than just. I mean, I know allegedly we broke away, no representation without taxation, but there were also some other things that we care about as Americans as well, and I think it goes a little bit beyond that. If you're only voting for your tax purposes, well, that's the only reason I can see to still vote for Trump is because of your taxes and also you hate women and minorities. Those two things come in there, or three things come in there as well.
Yeah.
Um, there's so many things I want to ask you about. I'm aware of time. Uh, do you, well, I know you have experience in the Middle East, and this is not a brief thing to bring up, but do you think that if there's, I mean, it's already been very tumultuous in the Middle East. Do you think that that will have an impact on the final vote? I mean,
Well, there are two things. Like, I wake, I go to bed at night. I shouldn't do it, but I check Twitter because that's where I get my breaking news. On still, you
I
know,
know, I know.
first thing in the morning when I wake up, and I would never be surprised if there was an assassination in America, and I would never
Mm,
be surprised if whatever is happening in the Middle East had really exploded.
yeah,
So anything can happen, but all things being equal, as they have been mostly since October 7th, is it won't have any impact
yeah,
on people's decision in America. Americans are voting about America, which is actually quite a good thing. In some ways, it's a shame that it takes a crisis of democracy to focus minds in this
mm,
way. And I know throughout the campaign, oh, Kamala's going to lose Michigan because people, Arabs, particularly you know Palestinian origin Arabs, won't have, they're angry with Biden. And you
yeah,
think, well, yeah. And all it takes is one person saying, "Do you remember the Muslim ban?" Was the first
yeah,
thing Trump did when he took office. And then people realize, well, I'm hung for a lamb as well as a sheep. And in that respect, I think I'd probably prefer Harris. So I don't think it
yeah,
makes a difference. In the Jewish community, and here I speak from deep knowledge, I think that there's just a hardcore 30% APAC supporters who think that Bibi Netanyahu can do no wrong.
mm,
But I don't think it extends beyond that. And
right,
that just doesn't make a difference. So, and I think that I don't think it'll make a difference. That's my thought. Unless, of course, there's a really successful attack via missiles by Iran, or Hezbollah somehow is able to unleash these serious ballistic missiles it allegedly has in tunnels and wipes out half of Haifa. That seems to be as far as they can get.
yeah,
Uh, Tel Aviv, they can intercept, but Haifa is really close to the border
yeah,
with Lebanon. Um, all bets are off, right?
yeah. Well,
But
that's
maybe not. Maybe not.
otherwise,
What I mean, what has Harris said? I mean, has Harris said, you know, I'm going to stop sending arms to Netanyahu if I'm elected? No,
no, she
she
hasn't.
wouldn't. You know.
No. All right. Well, the last two things just quickly. I think that the change up to Kamala has gone down well. She's come out, I mean, she's been strong so far up until this point. I mean, I think it's been good. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
do. I think that, and you saw it. What happened was, if you look at what happened in her first 3 weeks
Mm,
and look at where Biden was in polling, she made it all up.
yeah.
The fact that that momentum is perceived as having stopped, I mean, she made up in her own personal approval ratings 12
Mm,
points
yeah.
in under 3 weeks. Nobody's ever done that. But there's a limit because the country is so deeply divided. She's not going to bring new people in.
Yeah.
That's just not going to happen. So I think she's done okay.
And finally, you already said that you think Kamala is going to win. What do you we'll leave on what do you think your predictions are for the House? Will it swing back to the Democrats? And do you think that they can hold on to the Senate?
Um, well, look, I I go with my money man. Not that I have any money, but I have a friend who has built an extremely successful boutique investment house in New York.
Okay.
Very successful. And we've been in touch. And his basic view is mine that she will win, probably by a little less than Biden in the popular vote, but
Mm,
she'll win. And Congress it'll be the status quo.
okay.
GOP will hold on to the House,
Ah,
and they may take the Senate. I mean, I disagree with him. He thinks that it'll be 50-50 with Walz casting the deciding vote, as she did
mm.
during her time as vice president. I'm not completely confident about that. Um, so I would say to anyone in Texas listening, um, vote twice for the former NFL linebacker, Mr.
Well,
Allred.
yep.
And anybody listening in Arizona, what, are you kidding me?
I think
Carrie
Carrie,
Lake?
she's made a compelling case. I watched the debate, and if I was in Arizona, um, thank you for coming on. You're going to be sending reports and live from the U.S. Where can people find those reports?
At on Substack at
Yep.
First Draft of History Substack newsletter.
Okay.
And my podcast is FRDH, First Draft of History podcast, available wherever fine podcasts are streaming,
Yep.
from Apple to Spotify to my very own SoundCloud page. Do come
Nice.
and listen.
Well, thank you as always for coming on, Michael, and stay safe. Make sure you get that gun really early when you land. I think you can just pick them up at the airport these days, can't you?
Uh, no, but I'm going. I'm getting in the evening. Check into a motel. Next day, go to T-Mobile, update my American SIM card, and then next door to the T-Mobile is the gun shop. I'll see
There
what
we
I can
go.
do. You know,
Thanks so much, Michael.
take care, man.
Well, there we go. Another brilliant conversation with Michael Goldfarb. Thank you so much for him being on. Make sure to subscribe to his Substack, First Rough Draft of History. Check out his podcast, which has the same name, but the acronyms FRDH. I always have to look at that again so I don't say it the wrong way around. His book is coming out again with an update, so keep an eye out for that as well. He's going to be, sending news right now. You can check out his Substack to see what he's seen up close on the ground in Georgia and North Carolina. I'll be posting things as well about what I'm seeing from Philadelphia and from my family. I mean, I'm definitely having a cheesesteak. I'm going to report on that. I'm going to be in New York and have a slice. And I might talk about the election as well. But thanks again to Michael for coming on. Make sure to subscribe to his stuff. Please subscribe to this, like it, give us a review, do all that stuff you need to do. Thank you to Mark, the producer, for, as always, putting everything together. And of course, thank you to you, dear viewer and listener, for joining us once again. We'll see you the week of the election. Otherwise, thank you very much. Bye bye.